Podcast guests are fantastic. You get to cross-promote each other's podcasts. You get to connect with somebody you never would have connected with before. You get to have another perspective on something that you wouldn't have otherwise thought about. But there are some tips that will make your life a little easier and definitely make the guest's life a little easier. So let's get into it. What's up, everybody, and welcome to another video. This week, we're talking about podcast guests and how to be better prepared for them, how to get your guests better prepared for the show, and just kind of make your life a little easier and make the show flow a little smoother as you go. So like I said, guests can be a fantastic way to grow both of your shows. You can kind of cross-promote between the two shows, and maybe you can get a person who knows a little bit more about the subject that you're talking about than you, so therefore you can learn a little bit, your audience can learn a little bit, and then you can both be better off in the future, and it's just a good way to get a perspective that you wouldn't have otherwise gotten. So I will go over a few tips that will make your life a little easier, and then at the end, I'll kind of talk about some ways that maybe you could get some guests on your show, because there's a lot of people that would be willing to get on a podcast. They just don't know what shows they can get on. They don't know how to contact people. So there's a few ways that can make it a little easier to find guests for your show, or if you want to be on a guest on a show. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is prep some questions beforehand. You want to kind of lay out a few bullet points that you can follow if the conversation runs dry. You can come back to these questions, because in my experience, you want the interview to feel less like an interview and to feel more like a conversation that you're having with the person. So if you don't get to all of these questions that you've prepped, it's not a huge deal. It's more about the conversation and the flow that you're having, and you can make sure that you know all of the questions beforehand. That way, if the conversation kind of naturally leads into another question that you have that's not in order of the questions, then you know you can just kind of flow into those as you go. Now, when you're prepping these questions, you want to be aware of who you're interviewing. So you want them to kind of be prepped around the knowledge that this person is going to have. And if you don't know the person at all, do a little bit of research. Look them up, maybe even get a hold of them beforehand and kind of message them to see what kind of questions they would like to be asked, what they are comfortable talking about. It's all about keeping the flow going with your show, so they're comfortable, you're comfortable, you don't ever stop on any snafus that really halt the conversation. So you want to prep some questions around their personality, their knowledge, their niche. And then after you do prep those questions, I would suggest to send those questions to the guest before the interview, maybe the day before or a couple hours before, so they get a chance to kind of read them over and have a loose answer in their head for each one of those questions, or at least they know what questions that they're going to be asked. Even if you just share a Google Doc as you're recording and they can kind of read the questions while they are thinking about the answer, because that kind of gets them a little bit more comfortable. They know what's coming. They're not going to be blindsided by anything. And again, it's just all about that flow. It's all about that natural conversation. So the next thing that you want to do is try and get the best audio that you can. Now, obviously, the best case scenario is you would be interviewing someone in person. You'd be able to capture their audio yourself right into your computer. But a lot of the times that's not the case. They're calling in over Skype, or somehow they're calling in over the internet. So you want to be able to capture the best audio that you can. Now, if this other person is a podcaster themselves, that's fantastic, because then you know they're going to have a setup of their own. They're going to have a way that they can record their audio, and they can record their audio separately while you guys are talking over Skype or whatever platform you're using. So this kind of takes a little bit of back and forth between you and the guest of kind of figuring out the best way that you can go about this. Now, you should have an idea of all of the different options that you can take. So first, I would ask them if they could possibly record their own separate audio. And if not, it's not a big deal. You can take the audio from the platform that you're using. Now, I would probably recommend Zoom as the platform to use because they let you record stereo, which means you can record your audio on one track and their audio on another track, switch both of them to mono, then you got yourself separate tracks, rather than like if you use Skype, it's just going to record all of it in one, then you kind of have to cut between your audio and their audio. And there's a lot of platforms like that where it just records all of the audio in one, which is doable, but it just means a lot more work for you in the end. There's also Zencastr you can use. You can always use Skype. You can also record phone calls themselves using certain apps in your phone. I'll leave a link to some of those apps in the description, but you should try and avoid using phone call audio because that's generally the worst quality audio. And I don't know about you guys, but that kind of bothers me when I just hear phone call audio the entire time and it's almost barely audible because they didn't have very good reception or whatever it is. But that's something to think about, is trying to get the best audio possible, because generally you're not going to be in the same room. If you can be in the same room, that's fantastic, but generally that's not the case. The next thing I want to talk about is recommending different equipment to your guest. So when I say that, I don't mean recommend things to buy. I just mean recommend that they don't use their built-in computer microphone, or if you're calling in from the phone, try and use something other than just the actual microphone on the phone. Maybe get a headset that has a okay microphone or something, anything except for the built-in microphone on your computer and the built-in microphone on your phone, because those are probably the two worst microphones that you could use, especially for podcasting. So just when you get a hold of your guest, try and recommend that they use the best microphone that they have available, whether that be just a headset microphone or a nice microphone like this, whatever they have available, but make sure that they just don't use the built-in mics on your computer or on your phone, because it's just not going to sound good. So those are a few things that will help the show flow a little bit smoother and make your life a little easier. So you want to prep some questions, make sure the guest has those questions. You want to make sure you can capture the best audio quality possible. And you want to recommend equipment that isn't the built-in mic on your computer or on the phone, because you want to capture that good quality audio. Now, as for finding a guest for your show, you don't just want to find anybody. You want to find the best guest that you can for your subject or whatever your niche is. There's a lot of ways to do this, but something that I've found actually helps a lot is to check Reddit. And that goes for a lot of different social media platforms, but Reddit has a good community of podcasters. You can usually go on there and post about the fact that you want a guest on your show and make sure that you are specific in what kind of a guest you want, who you are looking for, what the general interest is for your show. Or you can go on there and post if you want to be on a show, if you think you'll be a good guest. There are even websites available like podcastguests.com that are specifically catered to finding guests for your podcast, or if you want to be a guest on a podcast. So there's a lot of different channels that you can go through. I like Reddit. It has had a lot of success for me. I know there's Facebook groups out there about podcasting. There is websites specifically catered to this. So there's a lot of channels out there that you can go through to find guests for your podcast, let alone if you just find somebody on Twitter that you think would be a good guest, or you find somebody on another social media platform that you think would be a good guest. All right, guys, thank you for watching these videos. I really appreciate it. Hit subscribe, hit the like, hit the bell, all that good stuff. And if you like these videos, tell a friend about them, because I think that is really what helps out the most, is the word of mouth between people. And go check me out on Instagram at iEditPodcast. And if you are interested in my editing services, you can check out iEditPodcast.com. All right, guys. See you next week. See ya.